Okay, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today here on Zoom. My name is Alex Maws. I'm the head of educational grants and projects at the Association of Jewish Refugees, or the AJR. And on behalf of the AJR and my colleagues, who I'll introduce in a moment, from the UK's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, I would like to welcome you and thank you for taking an hour or so out of your day to learn a little bit more about the work of the IHRA. This is the third out of three weekly discussions that we've been having for the past couple of weeks that are loosely around the theme of teaching and learning about the Holocaust in the UK. The occasion for this series of discussions was to launch a new publication recently put out by the IHRA on recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. And that was very much the theme of our first week. It was in the second week, we looked at how teaching and learning at the Holocaust takes place at museums and memorials and at archives. And if you weren't able to join us for either of those discussions, they are both available online now on the AJR's YouTube page. I will also send links to them along with a few other links after today's event. Just to tell you a little bit about the AJR, we were founded 79 years ago. We're coming up to our 80th anniversary. We provide social welfare programs for refugees from Nazism living in Britain and Holocaust survivors. And increasingly, we also are involved in educational initiatives as well. We fund and provide various other types of support for a range of different educational and commemoration and remembrance projects here in the UK. And that is something that we very much do on behalf of our members who would like to see their legacies preserved. And so it's in that spirit that we got together with our fellow members of the UK delegation to the IHRA to put on this series of events. And as I said, thank you very much for showing an interest in that work. A few brief housekeeping details. Those of you who haven't been on the previous week's discussions, just to say, this is meant to be an informal discussion amongst colleagues. I'll introduce our esteemed panelists in just a moment. So it will be rather free form. There aren't any formal presentations. Everyone is muted in the audience at the moment, and we'll keep it that way. When it comes time for questions, in fact, we do have time for questions. We sometimes do and sometimes don't. You can send them to me via text. The easiest way to do it, as I just put in the chat function, is just to send me something on the chat. I'm also keeping my eye on Twitter. I tend to leave Twitter for the discussion amongst yourselves, but if I see some interesting point there, I'll try and raise it here as well. We've disabled some of the normal functions of Zoom here for security reasons, so if you find that you can't do one of the things that you normally like to do, don't worry too much about it. I'm sure it's working as it's intended to. I want to just mention that two of my other colleagues from the AJR are here. Our Chief Executive Michael Newman and my colleague Carol Hart are both on as co-hosts as well. If you have any trouble or any questions during it, you can find them on the chat function as well. Just to say that we are recording this through Zoom. If you prefer not to be on a recording that will go on YouTube, very simple, you can just switch off your video and then you won't be on the recording, so that saves the trouble. As I mentioned, the occasion of this is the launch of these new IHRA recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. And if you have this, very good, Paula, it's as though you've done this before. My colleague Paula Cowan there, I don't know if you can see her, but she was just holding up a copy of it. She, as I'll introduce her in a second, she was very instrumental in producing these recommendations. So I'm very glad to see that she actually brought a copy. Mine, of course, is in my office, which I haven't been to in several months. But one of as we move a few weeks into the series of discussions, one of the secondary goals of these conversations, I think, is to give more of a broad picture of what it is that the IHRA does. I think that in the UK, you know, if people have heard of the IHRA at all, it is probably because of the debate in public discourse a few years ago over the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion about anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, and IHRA delegates, such as myself and my colleagues who are here today, and many others came forward and said, well, we have a tool that would be useful in addressing this. And that's where this discussion about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism came from. But I think that that probably gives people a very narrow view of what is actually an awful lot of work and a huge range of topics and broad range of expertise that is involved in the work of the IHRA. And so today I wanted to give you, our audience, a broader view of some of those projects and how they relate to us here in the UK and the work that we do. The IHRA has sort of two different levels. The diplomatic or government level, our delegation in the UK is led by Lord Pickles. And he is he's supported by a group of what's called the expert level, and I'm sorry for doing that in quotation marks. I always feel a little bit weird about being called an expert in anything, but I'm sure some of my colleagues are definitely experts. And we advise him and let him know about what is happening on the ground, in classrooms, at memorial events, what are our concerns, what are the trends, and so he has a better understanding of what to feed in to his colleagues at the diplomatic level. You know, going back to that definition of anti-Semitism from a few years ago, one of the points that I know our delegation made at the time, we released a statement about this, when people were debating, well, why didn't, you know, isn't this particular wording slightly different, or why have you said it this way rather than this way? And everyone seemed to have a view about what anti-Semitism is and isn't, that might have been ever so slightly different than what the IHRA definition said that it was. And the point that our delegation made at the time was that the strength of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and I think that this applies to a lot of other projects that the IHRA does, is in the fact that it is an international, intergovernmental network of now 34 different member countries. And sometimes things that are produced at the diplomatic level involve a little bit of compromise. It's unlikely that you're going to get something that is absolutely perfect to every single one of those 34 member countries. But of course, they were able to produce something that they all broadly believed was functional. And it stressed the point that when it comes to issues relating to Holocaust remembrance and anti-Semitism, these are global issues. There isn't one Polish definition of anti-Semitism and an American one, an Israeli one, or a right-wing one and a left-wing one, or something like that. And so it's very important, I think, to find some sort of international consensus on these issues. And that is very much what IHRA is about. For those of us who are at the expert level, as I said, we try to inform the decision makers at the government level on this. And I also think that we have a responsibility to disseminate all of the work that the IHRA does amongst our colleagues. I sort of think of ourselves as being in the importing and exporting business in that regard. We bring our best practices and expertise from the UK and share it with colleagues from around the world. And we bring those best practices that we learn about from around the world and we disseminate them here in the UK for the benefit of many people. Just looking across the audience here today, it seems like there is an awful lot of colleagues from across the Holocaust education and remembrance sectors. There are many survivors and refugees with us here today, members of the Jewish community. And so if this event only just serves to further that function of letting you know about the important work that's going on, really on all of your behalf at the international level, I think it will be a success. So that's my introductory spiel. With that, I would really like to turn it over to our panelists today. And I would like to welcome three of my colleagues from the IHRA delegation. This is actually the first time that all of our panelists are also IHRA delegates. So joining us today are Dr. Gilly Carr, who is Senior Lecturer and Academic Director in Archaeology at the University of Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education. Welcome, Gilly. Olivia Marks-Woldman, who is the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and Dr. Paula Cowan, who is Reader in Education at the University of the West of Scotland and also the Director of Vision School Scotland, which is a Holocaust education program in Scotland, which I think we'll hear a bit more about maybe in a few minutes. So welcome to all of our panelists. And I guess I want to just start because I think it's really interesting. The group that we have here today represents a broad range of the different sorts of projects that IHRA works on. And I have to pick on someone first. Olivia, are you okay if I pick on you? Okay, thumbs up from you, very good. And I guess the broad opening question I would ask you is, can you just for a few minutes explain some of the work that you've been involved with as an IHRA delegate? And then maybe just a little bit about how that you have found that to be applicable here in the UK. Let's try to unmute you. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Worked, thank you. Yes, of course, thank you very much, Alex. I want to start though with thanking you and the AJR for doing not only today, but the whole series of sessions. Fantastic initiative, and it's just wonderful to be on here with so many people talking about IHRA and the work that's going on. So massive credit to you all for pulling it all together. And a huge thank you to the leader of the UK delegation, as you said, Lord Eric Pickles, who's supported so effectively by Sally Seeley. It's wonderful to be part of a delegation with that leadership and to be part of a delegation with so many expert members. The bit of IHRA that you've asked me to talk about is the work of my committee. The way IHRA works is through these working groups on different topics and through committees. And I am currently part of the leadership of the Committee on the Holocaust, Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity. So I think probably the better answer I can give to your question, Alex, is to talk about that committee and how we at the UK are contributing to that area of IHRA's work. And as you say, in that two-way street, how that international audience working in the field of the Holocaust, genocide and crimes against humanity can inform work and practice going on in the UK. But perhaps I should first address the question of why does IHRA have a committee that addresses issues relating not only to the Holocaust, but how the Holocaust relates to genocides and crimes against humanity. Very obvious question might be, isn't teaching and learning about the Holocaust a big and an important enough topic on its own? Well, I think probably most of us here would agree, yes, it is. But as we all know, anti-Semitism didn't end after the Holocaust. Other forms of identity-based hostility didn't end after the Holocaust. At the extreme end, genocide didn't end after the Holocaust. And it's important to learn and recognize the patterns that have repeated in different countries, in different cultures, and against different groups. Muslims being forced to wear white armbands in Bosnia, Tutsis called cockroaches in Rwanda, and so on. The steps that led to the Holocaust have been repeated in the steps that led to other genocides more recently. Stereotyping, propaganda, separation, symbols, and so on. But as well as it being important to recognize those patterns, we also know that some comparisons are at best not helpful and at worst downright offensive. Some language is simply inappropriate, some language is deliberately used to distort the Holocaust. Where these comparisons are unhelpful, where language is unhelpful or obfuscating or damaging, they are actively distorting the Holocaust. They muddy the historical record. They distort or they even deny the Holocaust. So the committee's work is in large part to identify, to share good practice and to guide where comparisons and learnings are helpful and valuable, and to challenge where they are unhelpful or offensive or distorting. The committee carries forward IHRA's core aims to safeguard the historical record and to counter distortion. But it's doing so within a recognition that the broad context that we're working in has had some significant changes over the past decades. Evolving practice within the fields of Holocaust education, commemoration, and research, for example. Over the years, that academic discovery, opening of archives has led to developed understanding and new knowledge. Over the past decades, we're also seeing changing audiences, not only newer young people coming forward, but we're seeing groups of people coming to learn about the Holocaust who previously, in previous generations, have not had that interaction. Through migration and through globalizing audiences, there are many people who have had no historical connection to the Holocaust, but who are coming to learn from it and learn about it. Some of these people might carry their own history of genocide or of mass atrocity or of human rights violations. Another key change in the broad context has been increasing references to the Holocaust within popular culture and particularly on social media. So we see these changes, and the work of my committee is trying to do that. I'm going to speed up because I know that there's a lot to talk about and you want to bring in other panelists. I want to talk very briefly about some of the very specific work that we're doing. I'd love to talk about the broader strategic context for it, but I think it's probably helpful if I just mention a couple of examples of very specific work the committee is doing. One example of past work is a matter of comparison report, which brings together internationally organizations that are conducting work in the field of the Holocaust and recent genocides and crimes against humanity. So it lists by country organizations that are involved in this work. So it's a useful tool. And part of my committee's work not only was to create this report a few years ago, but to update it, which is a massive task. I really recommend, if you're interested in this, that you look it up on the IHRA website. Don't shout at me if you see things that need updating. We know, and we're getting to it. An example of something that we're in the process of developing is a paper on terminology, on language, to provide that really helpful guidance on where language could be inappropriate and where it could be helpful. Even things like talking about the Holocaust and other genocides might be offensive to people who have been at the receiving end and being victimized in those genocides, and lumping them all together might not be helpful in some contexts, for example. We also have links with international genocide networks, predominantly GAC, the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes. And part of the committee's work has been to develop those links and strengthen them. I could carry on talking, but I think I might get a Paddington hard stare from you. So I'll stop there, and I hope that gives you a flavour of what the committee is doing and why it thinks it's important for IHRA to be doing this work. And I'll come back on any questions if people want to ask further detail. Thank you.
I've never hard stared at anyone before, but thank you. It's really interesting, Olivia, because I think we have a lot of teachers and educators with us today, and that question about to what extent does one try to link learning about the Holocaust to other things, you know, to make connections, more contemporary ones or just other lateral ones, is one that I know a lot of people struggle with. And I would hope it gives them some comfort to know that there is an entire committee of experts that say, you're not wrong for struggling with this. We debate this very issue, and where, you know, how do we communicate it in classrooms, at memorial events, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's great to hear about that work that you're involved in. So thanks for that. I want to, and speaking of education, I did mention at the outset that the occasion of this talk is the launch of the new IHRA recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. And Dr. Paula Cowan was one member of the working group or committee that was tasked with writing those, or I suppose updating those. Paula, can you tell us about how that came about and how the project went, and you know, your views on the final product?
It's congratulations to IHRA for organising this. My thanks to everybody too. Can I also say, looking at the participant list, just before I start and answering your question, and I'm going to time myself, Alex. I'm going to keep it within time, so don't worry. But can I just say, it's wonderful to see some people from Vision School Scotland here. It's wonderful to see a lot of speakers from AJR, Holocaust survivors, etc., who I've heard speak, and I've invited them to speak in Scotland. So I'm very thrilled to be speaking and have the opportunity to answer your question now. The IHRA had their own guidelines, which they had devised for teaching and learning about the Holocaust 20 years ago. It was a very good document, very explicit, very detailed, and you could argue that once you're going to, you've just made that decision to refresh something, you've got an even bigger responsibility to work on something that's good and make it better. And we all took that very, very seriously, and we felt the change was required because of all the changes, all the transformation in Holocaust education that had taken place in 20 years. Pedagogical changes in the classroom with active learning and learner-centered approaches, interdisciplinary learning, new findings from Holocaust research into the history of the Holocaust, whether it be about killing sites or whether it be about the persecution of the Roma and the Sinti. And indeed new educational research findings about how to teach it. So we wanted to put it all together in a very meaningful way. And we did so, and I'm going to use the word experts again, which might nauseate some people, but I'm going to use it anyway. But we were a group of 8, if you don't want to call us experts, call us people with varying degrees of expertise and experience in teaching and learning about the Holocaust. But there was 8 of us from US, UK, Hungary, Germany, France, Netherlands, Spain, and Norway. You know, from countries where we were allies, we were occupied, we were perpetrators, or we were neutral. We were there representing everybody. And we wanted to write something that was going to be meaningful for educators, a wide range of educators in formal and informal settings. And I don't know if anybody has read any part of the recommendations yet, but one of the things we say at the beginning is that there's no single or correct way of teaching the Holocaust. There's no ideal methodology appropriate for all educators, and their learners exist for any subject. And you might be a bit cynical and say that's a bit of a disclaimer. But no, we're not. We're not trying to disclaim it at all. We're actually trying to be respectful and reflect what is out there. There's certainly research findings that demonstrate rather that factors that impact in teaching and learning a Holocaust are a country's history of anti-Semitism, are a country's experience and history of communism, of genocide, as Olivia's just alluded to actually, and ethnic cleansing, and of course their experience of refugees. And so that's why we've written that. And we went through drafts of collaborative work. We shared our first drafts with a group of another 8 teachers from different countries at a teacher forum. They fed into our second draft, and then we received more than 100 comments from representatives from the IHRA, and we critically discussed each of these comments and responded to these comments. But they fed into this final document, which we are very proud of. I know it's not perfect, but we are very, very proud of, because it's inclusive and it's meaningful. Whether you are a student teacher, a museum educator, teaching the Holocaust in prisons, or an experienced secondary school teacher, it is of use to everybody. Sorry, you're on mute now, Alex. It's your turn.
That's going to be the theme for the day. It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting if there wasn't a lot of "Can you hear me? You're on mute." I was just going to say that the amount of consultation that you're just describing is really remarkable. So that when, you know, I could imagine in your work when you're training teachers in Scotland and other folks that do these sorts of things elsewhere, you know, it carries a lot of weight to be able to say these are internationally agreed upon guidelines. You know, this is not just, you know, me, one teacher training, trying to tell you, you know, some of the best practice, but I mean, this really has been fed in by people from all over the world, which is remarkable. And I really liked what you said about there not being one right way. There's so much in there that's about, you know, the local context, about, you know, different subject areas in schools and that sort of thing. So thank you for that. I will just say, wearing my AJR hat for 1 second, you know, I had said as part of the question, how is it applicable in the UK? Well, at the AJR, I mentioned in the introduction, we fund a number of educational initiatives. And one of the decisions that we've taken upon the launch of these new recommendations is that all of our funding partners, certainly in the application phase and then moving on, need to demonstrate the extent that they plan to adhere to these new recommendations. It wouldn't really, what's the point of having internationally agreed upon recommendations if we as members of the IHRA delegation ourselves don't even hold our own partners to it? So just wanted to let you know that that's something that's happening. Hopefully you and your colleagues who are involved in it would be pleased to know about that. Now, I want to move on to Dr. Gilly Carr from University of Cambridge. And Gilly, you are on the, along with Paula also, Paula didn't talk about her work on the academic working group, but that's where you normally sit. And I know that you are also involved in an interesting sort of project that's still at the early stages. So whereas the educational recommendations are more or less complete, other than the dissemination, you're in the earlier stages of some work that deals with Holocaust sites. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's lovely to see my IHRA colleagues here, as well as some other friends and colleagues amongst the group that's turned up today. Yes, Alex, I'm chairing a relatively new IHRA project called Safeguarding Sites, the IHRA Charter for Best Practice, and it's all about finding a way to safeguard the many Holocaust and Roma genocide sites throughout Europe. And as many of you may know from your own travels and your own experience, a number of these sites today are falling apart, they're decaying, they're being destroyed intentionally and unintentionally, they're being reused for other things. And this is something that concerns and worries IHRA, because we believe that these sites should be preserved and managed. And so the group that I have is we're an international team made up of other IHRA delegates, and we also have representatives from a number of different international heritage organizations throughout the world. And because this is essentially, as well as being a Holocaust project, it's a heritage project, because these are heritage sites today, as well as being memorial sites. And so our aim is to, over the 5 years of the project, we'll be working very closely with a number of different Holocaust sites and Roma genocide sites that will inform the guidelines that we're writing. So let me take a step back by starting off. We started off with the observation that there are a number of different challenges which face Holocaust sites today. So we made a list of all of these challenges, because that's the first step. Until you recognize what all of the challenges are, then you can't begin to work on how you might counter those challenges. So to give you a flavor of that list, I shall consult my list now. We've got neglect, which leads to decay. We've got deliberate destruction of sites through terrorism, vandalism, extremist action. There's deliberate or accidental destruction in warfare. There's a lack of financial support. There's a problem of distortion of narratives and misappropriation of narratives at camps in some parts of Europe. There's been destruction of sites because of new building projects. There's been alternative inappropriate reuse of sites, a lack of heritage protection for some sites. Looting has been a problem, and theft from sites. We need only be reminded of the theft of the Arbeitsmacht-frei sign from Auschwitz. Gosh, that was probably nearly 10 years ago now, but that was found again. All of these things sort of are threats to the integrity of sites. There's also the problem of private ownership, because where sites are on land which is privately owned, that means that we're sort of powerless to intervene and take charge and help these sites unless the owner is willing to join in. There's also the problem of climate change. With increased sea levels, there are some sites close to the coasts which are at a threat of flooding. There's also the problem of natural disasters and lack of knowledge at some sites where either we don't know stuff or we do know about the sites, but there's no acknowledgement or memorialization at the sites themselves. There's problems of wear and tear. But of course, one of the problems that's really come to our attention this year is the problem of pandemics. What happens at sites where nobody can visit? And what happens in those sites when everybody's gone home, when no one's keeping an eye on it? I mean, I don't know whether as these sites, as the memorials begin to have the staff move back in, whether they'll find that there's been vandalism or anything that's happened at sites when they haven't been there. So in acknowledging all of these problems, our next step is to find ways to counter them. And IHRA has traditionally worked with many Holocaust sites which are, metaphorically speaking, on fire, by which I mean there's been an immediate problem where people have had to come in and do something straight away because otherwise the site will be lost, or there's, you know, something really tremendously important happening now. But the project that I'm working on recognises that to a certain extent all sites are on fire, but we're sort of taking a cooler approach, and we're, rather than having the sites choose us because there are immediate problems, we're choosing to work with sites where we really need to learn how is it that you can work with sites where, for example, perhaps the local community does not want you there, does not want you to get involved, does not want any kind of interference on what they're doing with their sites. And by having the experience of working with a community and working through that, we can begin to sort of inform our guidance and our guidelines, so that this really is our task for the next 5 years. And although this year we were supposed to be going to Mauthausen and Gusen in Austria, and I was so looking forward to going, but because of the pandemic, of course, it looks like we're probably going to have a 1-year delay on the project, because we simply can't get out into the field because our team members are from all over the world, and we with borders still up in for many parts of many countries, it's a problem. So last year we went to Alderney in the Channel Islands, and because we felt that if there was a Brit leading the project, then we have to be prepared to look in our own backyard. And we know that the Channel Islands were the only part of the British Isles that were occupied during the Second World War, and many of the things that we see happening in occupied Europe happen in the Channel Islands, persecution of the Jews, labour camps, concentration camps, etc. And the island of Alderney, the third largest island, is where there's quite a concentration of issues. There's an alleged mass grave. There's dispute about that. There's 1 or 2 concentration camps, depending on whose definition you go on. There's several slave labour camps, and the island is 3 miles by 1.5 miles in dimensions. And so you can understand the issues of a community who have this literally in their back garden. And in fact, there are a number of houses built on the sites of some of these. So that there is someone who is living on a former slave labour camp, and by telling that person what they should do with their own backyard, that's something that's challenging.
I mean, when I first asked the question and said, how is it, applicable, or how does it impact upon the UK? I mean, I know the Channel Islands aren't technically the UK, but what's the term? Crown dependencies, or?
That's right.
Right. So I mean, it's amazing the extent to which that work that you're doing also does hit very close to home as well. So that's a really interesting project. Thank you for sharing that with us. Paula, I mentioned before that you and Gilly, in addition to the specific projects that you've outlined, you sit on the academic working group, which also just more generally monitors issues within the world of academia that pertain to Holocaust education, research, remembrance. What are some of the hot button issues at the moment that your committee or your working group is dealing with? And I apparently need to, there we go, yep.
Thank you. Well, first of all, can I just say that there are, because you mentioned AJR's funding program, and the IHRA too has a funding review committee, and there are representatives from each of the working groups sit on the funding review. We all take turns to do it, And I think that that's another way in which it affects the UK, because certainly when I sat on the review committee, we reviewed and assessed grant applications and Holocaust-related projects, some from the UK. Obviously, I was not allowed to be part and parcel of that discussion. I had to walk out the room, but it is something that people can realise that the IHRA are doing that too. Regarding the academic working group, though, first of all, there's many of my colleagues, and it's not me, but many of my colleagues in the academic working group have done research and have come up with publications that are freely downloadable on the IHRA website. I think the most recent one is Murder of People with Disabilities and the Holocaust. There's one on refugee policies from 1933 until today, and there's one about neutral countries and bystanders. So we come up with some proper publications that contribute to the body of knowledge of history of the Holocaust. The academic working group was instrumental in opening the International Tracing Service archives in Bad Arolsen, which houses the world's largest archive on the victims and survivors of the Nazi regime. And I do remember that when I joined the IHRA, which I think was in 2009, one of the items on the agenda that was on every single subsequent year, and I think it's just about, might go off now, but it's always been an item for discussion, was the ongoing dialogue and communication that our representatives had with the Vatican regarding releasing the Vatican archives. And I'm delighted to announce, if you don't already know, that just prior to the pandemic, earlier this year, the Vatican decided to open its archives on the Holocaust era, which is just an immense importance to researchers today. One of what you asked, how did you put it, one of the hotbed issues or something like that? Trying to sensationalize Holocaust education, are you?
We have to make it sexy.
Okay. I think one of them has to be and we discussed that, I think we probably discussed it in every working group. Certainly it's discussed in the Committee of Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial and at the AWG, which is the academic working group, is the situation regarding the progress of the opening of the House of Fates in Budapest. I don't know if anybody's been following the controversy. This is a government-funded Holocaust museum, which was due to open several years ago. And how we've been involved in it, and it's not me personally, but again, colleagues on the AWG who are eminent historians, such as the late David Cesarani, for example. He was part of a group delegation to Budapest to discuss the narrative of that particular museum, because the problem or the difficulty or the challenge is that the narrative is omitting the rising anti-Semitism that occurred in Hungary at that time and the level of complicity amongst the Hungarians that led to the swift murder of its 600,000 Jews. And this is an ongoing issue. We've been receiving presentations from both the Hungarian government and indeed from the Hungarian Jewish community. And I know that they are very keen to get the support of IHRA, but it hasn't at the moment been forthcoming because these issues have not been resolved. So I would say that's one that's ongoing.
Very good, thank you. And yeah, thank you for raising the point about the Vatican. That was such a momentous decision for them to open their archives. And I think researchers, historians are only beginning now to scratch the surface. And unfortunately, I'm sure, coronavirus has gotten in the way of the ability to actually make use of that. But that was one of the sort of treasure troves of information that I know academics have for a very long time been trying to get access to. And it has been thanks to as I mentioned, the very diplomatic approaches from colleagues at the IHRA that was, I think, able to finally come to fruition. Olivia, I wanted to come back to you. If I remember correctly, the question I wanted to ask was something I mentioned in the introduction about, the extent to which there's this, two-way exchange and, expertise from the UK benefits others around the world. Now, you're the chief executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and I know, the UK is looked at as a shining example of a country that has really taken up the concept of a Holocaust Memorial Day in a way that others could learn from. which is very much down to you and your team there. And if I remember correctly, wasn't there a project a few years ago where you were part of a group that was trying to help other countries, you know, develop similar sorts of programs? And I'm going to unmute you. There we go.
Does that work? Thank you. Yes, you're right. And I think the UK is a leader in this field for a number of reasons. Thank you. I think it's largely down to the work of my amazing team. But of course, it's also down to the enormous commitment from the UK government and the funding they've given to HMD and the commitment that the government has given to Holocaust Memorial Day. And that's something that we've been able to recommend to other countries. From the beginning, when they're showing an interest in joining IHRA, the other reasons are, I'd say, so commitment from the government, having a fantastic team, but also the model that the UK has established for Holocaust Memorial Days is one that other countries are beginning to follow our lead on. From the very beginning, the UK took a view that commemoration should be national, as with the UK ceremony, but it should also be local. And we now see thousands and thousands of communities around the UK, whether it's local government ones like civic events, schools, or whether it's a prison, a cinema, a business, a library, a museum. It's rooted in local communities coming together. And we're able to share that expertise through IHRA formal groupings where we've had a subcommittee looking at how we can share expertise, not only the UK, but some other countries as well, and then share that guidance, but also with expert field trips. So I was part of a delegation, for example, that went to Bulgaria when they were considering applying to IHRA and were going through the formal processes. And we hosted a delegation from Australia a couple of years ago. We weren't the only people they saw, of course, but they timed their visit around Holocaust Memorial Day because that was an integral part of what they were doing and looking at developing. One thing that surprised me when I joined the IHRA delegation and started to understand a bit more about IHRA was how very formal its processes are. It's not a matter of saying, please can we join, we'll pay a subscription, we've got some experts we can pull together, thank you very much. It's a very, very formal process. Countries become, first of all, observers. And then if they meet certain criteria, they move to a liaison stage. And only after they've been able to demonstrate their commitment to a range of initiatives and a range of values relating to Holocaust research, commemoration, education, and so on. And every country has to complete a baseline survey of what they're doing. And Holocaust Memorial Day is part of that. And that's a really good way that countries audit their own work as a baseline, but also look at where they could be improving. And they can then approach experts and say, we need a bit of guidance on this, or we think we're doing very well on this, but we really could do with some help. It's a very honest process, which can be challenging, but it's a very collaborative process as well.
That feeds very nicely into what I was going to raise as the next topic, which is the country reporting function. So, it's, as you point out, it's very difficult for countries to go through that process to become a member. And it's a bit of a two-sided thing. I mean, IHRA, of course, broadly wants more countries to be members. It wants more countries to be involved in this work, but of course, not just anyone can say that they're, committed to Holocaust education, research, and remembrance, because that, in a sense, could be very good PR for them without them actually having to do the hard work that's involved in it. And one of the things that IHRA does is every 5 years, each country that is an IHRA member has to produce a country report. And this is a really, it sounds, I can probably, hear the sound of, people switching off their cameras, getting up to go make a cup of tea, because this sounds really procedural and maybe mundane, dare I say boring, but it's actually really important, which is to say that countries might have joined IHRA, almost 20 years ago, signed on to the principles of the Stockholm Declaration, saying that they support the importance of Holocaust education, remembrance, and research. But then all sorts of things can change. Governments can change, different, cultural factors come into force and things like that. And so the IHRA asks them every 5 years to just update this international grouping of people on their recent progress. And I think that that's so important to hold countries to account. Paula mentioned, this concern with Hungary about a very problematic museum that has been, built but not yet opened there. And, the question for a country like Hungary is, well, what do you do when they have said that they support Holocaust education, remembrance, and research, but they're not really acting towards those principles? And you don't want to kick them out of IHRA, because then you have no ability to engage with them. So it's, how do we use diplomacy to get the results that we hope for? And the UK has just recently redrafted and resubmitted our own country report. And I think it's worth, those, once it's online, I don't think it's quite online yet, but it is worth looking at the extent to which we are open and honest about our own struggles and challenges, but also obviously our successes and the things that we're very proud of. Paula, what are some of the things, all of us were involved in contributing to that country report, but, looking at the final product, what are some of the things that stand out for you that you think are noteworthy for people to know about, that we're telling the rest of the world about? And I'm unmuting you. There we go.
Thank you, Alex. Actually, the first thing I want to say is I don't think British people, and I don't want to stereotype in a webinar like this, but I don't think British people are actually, it's not one of our strengths, actually, is to talk about what we're good at. But I'm going to have a go at it. I'm going to have a go at it. I think I do totally, I just say I totally concur with what Olivia said about Holocaust Memorial Day. I think the way that we commemorate this annually is just is excellent. We in Scotland do it slightly differently in partnership with HMDT, in that we kind of have a mobile sort of, how do I say it? It's, how do you explain that? It's not based centrally in one city. It's moved and it involves other communities, and that's another model which I think can work for some other countries too. Not all, but some. But no, I think there's two things that come to mind straight away that I think we do very well. I first of all, as an academic researcher, I have to talk about research. Now, you'll know that I've done some small scale research here in Scotland, but at the Centre of Holocaust Education at UCL, they've done very large scale, groundbreaking international research using, thousands, 8,000 or more participants, which is just fantastic. And not only is the research on this, not only does the research bring interesting findings which people can take from the world, but the process in which it's done, the fact that this research is funded as a collaboration between private funding and government funding, is something which some countries which can do that don't do that. And I mean, unfortunately, I'm not in the situation here in Scotland. We don't have that government funding, so I know I'd be very grateful for it. But I think it's something that there's a commitment to, and we should be applauding that commitment, because not everybody is doing that. And I accept that some countries can't do that, but some jolly well can and don't. The other point I'd make is that I think we in this country, like the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust that Olivia's CEO of, we have excellent Holocaust education providers. We have such a range, and they've all got their own niche areas, and they do fantastic work. And whether it's Olivia doing what she's doing in Holocaust Memorial and commemoration and outreach in schools and wider communities, whether it's the Holocaust Educational Trust and their Lessons from Auschwitz program, and again, that too is government funded. And the impact that has made over the years, whether it be the National Holocaust Centre and Museum with its own niche area in bringing younger children, working with primary aged children, and looking at new digital technologies in learning. And whether it be at the Anne Frank Trust, I've worked with the Anne Frank Trust too many years ago. They began with I think I'm right in saying, they actually began with an online exhibition on the story of Anne Frank, but they didn't, it was more than that. They began with this exhibition that they took around, it was mobile, they took it around places, people learned from the exhibition, but they also had training for young people to actually present the exhibition. And I've actually been around the exhibition on my own, with secondary school children showing me the way, with young people in the community guiding me around it, and in Scotland I actually visited a Scottish prison and was shown around by prisoners. So we do some very innovative work here. Our education providers do an excellent job, and I think we should be jolly well proud of it.
Well, that's good, and I think, you know, one of the challenges is, of course, you know, countries should, you know, even Britain, a country, as you point out, that, you know, doesn't naturally congratulate itself very easily, has a lot to be proud of, and I think that that does stand out. And one of the challenges in these country reports, I think, is, of course, making sure that it doesn't just become an exercise in self-congratulation, and the questionnaire that countries are asked to fill out actually does ask some questions that, you know, there's really sort of no way of just applauding yourself. But I was just rereading our own country report. You know, it asks a question: what future challenges do you envisage? Where are the political, societal, or legal difficulties? Are these local problems which require local solutions? Or would they benefit from a more collective or international approach? And our answer in this was, we talked about the extent to which, whilst Holocaust education is embedded in the national curriculum in England anyway, and that is something that we should congratulate ourselves for, that increasingly there are all these different varieties of schools that aren't bound to the national curriculum. And so we're being very open about this, because for many years we, you know, quite rightly bragged about the fact that it is a compulsory topic in Key Stage 3 history. But of course, you know, now we recognize that there's a threat to that, and we're telling that to the world, and that by putting that in the public sphere, I think that presents a challenge. We are sort of openly challenging ourselves in this sector to come up with something to an approach to doing that better. I also just wanted to point out that it has been, this is the 20th anniversary of the Stockholm Declaration, which is the founding declaration of the IHRA. And it's interesting, you know, I was saying about how do you ensure that those principles continue to be adhered to over time. Well, country reporting is one mechanism, but also, and maybe this is practical and maybe it's symbolic, all the different IHRA countries just recently agreed on a joint reaffirmation of the Stockholm Declaration. I think it's very important to say that whatever may have happened, and I don't want to single out particular countries, but whatever changes may have happened politically over the past generation or so in countries, that they still hold to these principles. One of the points in this joint statement that I thought was really interesting in light of debates that are going on today was we, the members of IHRA, encourage all countries and societies to address their respective pasts by dealing openly and accurately with the historical record. And just bearing in mind the conversations that have been happening here in Britain and obviously in the United States and maybe in other places as well recently in regards to statues and monuments and memorials and things like that, it does, I think it raises a point that those of us whose expertise, again, is in Holocaust memory actually have something very valuable to offer to conversations that aren't necessarily about the Holocaust, because these are discussions that have been going on for the past 20 years or so in our sphere. And so I don't know if anyone at Oxford University or in Bristol wants to come asking us our opinion about what to do with their dodgy statues, but I'm sure some IHRA experts would have some very good views and guidance on that topic as well. We don't have much time, and there are a lot of questions, and so I'm going to apologize in advance to all the people who we're not going to get to. Let's see. Zoe asked, can I have that quote again? It's about, you'll find it on the IHRA website in the news section about the joint statement. Let's see, Gilly, you were a very, your topic of Holocaust sites was very popular with our questioners here. I'm scrolling up because it was a little while ago, trying to find it. I'm going to unmute you now so that when I ask you the question, we can seamlessly then go. So Joanna says, there's also a problem where the sites are in countries who wish to forget their involvement. Who pays for their upkeep? Is IHRA looking at the disconnect with education? This is sort of a separate question. Well, why don't you answer that question about who pays for the upkeep of sites where countries aren't particularly keen to remember this part of their history?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. It probably differs for every single country, but I think, and it depends whether it's on private land or public land, but I think the landowner or the state or the region, as I say, depending on country, will be responsible for paying for it or not paying for it and letting it fall into wreck and ruin and letting it become so overgrown that only archaeologists can find any traces, which is where people like me come in, because I'm an archaeologist by training as well as someone who researches into the Holocaust.
Very good. And just while you're unmuted, Anthony Leshak says, can you say something more about the practical ways in which the IHRA engages with local communities in establishing Holocaust memorials in their, quote, backyards? I'm aware of many Jewish cemeteries in Poland, he says, for example, that are cherished by locals and others that are seen as quite divisive. Direct involvement of the locals in the planning stages seems to be absolutely essential. Is that something that your committee, is looking at solutions towards in terms of engaging with local?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it's really hard to generalize because every single site in every single country is very difficult and it's very different, And as I say, the place that we're dealing with at the moment, Alderney in the Channel Islands, there's very mixed views amongst the local community as to what extent they want anyone to even visit the island for the sake of viewing these sites. Let alone who is responsible for their upkeep, whether there should be any signs put up or anything. But I speak as someone who's spent the last 15 years working with the Channel Islands because they're my area of expertise. I don't mind using the word expert at all.
You actually are an expert. I'm fine with that.
And if I can just sort of reflect on this for a second, when I started, I mean, I should say that my mother's family is from the Channel Islands as well, so I have that kind of vested interest. But when I first started doing my field work there, the situation in Guernsey, the second largest island, was that they were not at all comfortable in talking about anything to do with victims of Nazism, which meant that they weren't mentioned in museums and there weren't memorials, and it was just sort of a no-go subject. And over the last 15 years, I have been working on a variety of fronts. So I've done everything from speaking on Holocaust Memorial Day, organising Holocaust Memorial Day events, writing articles from the local newspaper, speaking on the radio, speaking on local television, working with local communities to get memorials erected to victims of Nazism, and having a Facebook page, and just sort of on 1,001 different fronts, taking incremental steps and creating events as well, which start to kind of, if you like, the way I see it, I call it as puncturing holes in the taboo of talking about these things, such that it becomes normalized to talk about, and it becomes normalized to remember victims of Nazism, and it becomes desirable to memorialize them and to have museum exhibitions. And so having had that experience, that it didn't start out as a campaign 15 years ago, it's just looking back and reflecting on what I had done in that island and seeing the change that it's caused, I'm hopeful that something similar would be successful elsewhere. But I'm well aware that the Channel Islands are very different to Poland. And so really, one of the problems with this is you have to take each site as it comes, and it presents its own challenges. But I really hope that we will begin to build up, by having such a sort of broad team and working with so many sites and so many experts, will begin to sort of build up processes that will work with a variety of different communities, no matter what their challenges. So as I say, it's a 5-year project, and it's early days in the project, but this is our aim, so that we will eventually have guidelines which all IHRA countries, all 34 IHRA countries, will sign up to and say, yes, we commit to take these steps to safeguard our sites, and that includes paying.
Thank you. Question here. I'm worried at the 1 hour mark. This is one that should be its own separate discussion. But Lizzie writes, the Holocaust is not a prescribed topic at any level of schooling in Scotland. Paula, I'm going to unmute you now just because we're going to come to you. In Scotland, what do the panelists think on this? If it is in England at Key Stage 3, should it be compulsory? I'll take a quick crack at this as a member of the education working group of the IHRA. I think that, obviously it's a very strong statement from a country to put it in its national curriculum, but I think it's very important to dispel any myth that that's some sort of magic solution to educating everyone about the Holocaust. As we've, seen, and we talked, I think, in week 1 of these discussions, the key challenge is obviously resources for teachers, sufficient training, and critically time. And teachers really want, in my view, and Paul, I want to hear yours, is that teachers are very keen to teach about the Holocaust. Students are very keen to learn about the Holocaust. So I think that regardless of whether it was on a national curriculum, they would do it, but still they need to be, given enough space to do it properly. Paula, what's your view on that?
Yeah, it's such a big question, and I've got a feeling whatever I'm going to say isn't going to be right, actually. It's not going to please everybody.
Okay, in 1 minute or less.
Okay. Actually, Alex, I agree with an awful lot of what you've said there. Okay, I don't think by making it mandatory, you're necessarily promoting effective teaching of the Holocaust. You are promoting its teaching. And I think that teachers who sometimes choose to teach it and who are interested enough to teach it, who don't necessarily have to teach it without being coerced into doing it in some occasions, teach it in a very positive and very effective way. Regarding your time though, and I know that we're running out of time, so I'm going to answer it very, very quickly. One of the things that's coming through in the schools who are applying to be a vision school, we're talking about a small number, and I know that, okay? But they're embedding it in their school, and they're embedding it in several different ways. And one of the ways they're embedding it is that they are making time for it. It's not just 1 hour and a half for Key Stage 3 history lesson. It's a series of 8 or 9 lessons in S2, learning about Judaism in S1, learning about the Holocaust in S2, developing it in a different curricular area in S3 or 4, and learning from the LFA program in S5, S6. So they are making time. So I think time is a crucial factor, and sometimes when you're making it mandatory, it doesn't actually focus on the time issue, which you're absolutely correct to identify as important.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think we need to wrap up. I just wanted to give an opportunity if Olivia or Gilly had any sort of topics that they wanted to touch on from the work that they've been doing, that that they feel like this is their opportunity to let people across the sector know about, that that they haven't had a chance to yet. And Gilly, Olivia, you're shaking your head enthusiastically. Yes.
Thank you very much, Alex. Yes, I just wanted to comment on, to raise one word that hasn't come up yet, and that is impact. What's the impact of all the work that we're doing? And it's such a hard word to talk about, which may be why it hasn't come up. Maybe we will assume that we're all having a big impact. But I just wanted to raise it. Just speaking for ourselves, we've done some work to work out, well, what is the impact we're actually trying to make with Holocaust Memorial Day? The differences we're trying to make are threefold. For people to learn more about the Holocaust and more recent genocides, and to understand their relevance today. For people to feel more, to develop empathy, to have an understanding of the history on the individual people who were affected, and to have empathy for people today who may be the victims of identity-based hostility. And thirdly, that knowledge and that empathy will lead to action. I think it's really important to spell out some of those issues of what we're really trying to achieve here. I can't speak for the whole sector. People will have slightly different views on the difference they're trying to make, depending on what their project is. But I didn't want to leave without raising that issue. Thanks, Alex.
No, thank you for that. And I think the word impact was in the title of this talk. So the fact that it only came up now is a little bit embarrassing. So thank you for that. Gilly, was there anything else that you wanted to add to the mix? No? A shrug will suffice. That's very good. Okay, well, with that, I really want to thank all of our viewers or audience or whatever, however we say it here for joining us. Those of you who've been with us for more than just today, that shows a level of interest and commitment that is well above and beyond any expectations. So thank you so much. I really do hope that this has gone some way towards giving you some practical guidance in terms of the new educational recommendations and just, better understanding of the sector here in the UK and how we connect internationally. My colleague, Michael Newman, our chief executive, has asked if he could have the final word, and I think that would be only appropriate. Michael, I'm unmuting you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. Yes, it's not often as chief exec I get to have the final word, and I've been a silent partner over these last 3 symposiums. But as well as thanking my IHRA colleagues, and it's fantastic to see them, especially because we were supposed to be at the plenary in Berlin next week. So seeing you in my, I was about to say seeing you in my bedroom, but seeing you in a room in my house we'll have to make do instead. Also, those who contributed the last 2 weeks, as well as those who've been on in the audiences the last couple of weeks. There's some familiar faces I've seen over the past fortnight. And the reason I wanted us to have the final word was to thank Alex for putting this all together. It's really a fantastic achievement on our behalf, and comments that have come to me, you can already see the applause has already started. The comments that have come to me privately in the Zoom chat, just showing appreciation to the IHRA has been very well received, and I can only but share it on with you. So thank you very much for that. And as we end a lot of our Zoom events by saying we look forward to seeing you physically and in future Zoom events as well. So stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, everyone. Be well.